I'm Leontine, 58 years old, and I never thought my only son's wedding would end with me in tears. After raising Jacob alone for 25 years and contributing over $45,000 to his special day, I was crushed when he whispered, "Mom, maybe it would be better if you just left." His fiancée, Ashley, stood smugly nearby. As I walked away, something inside me snapped. If they didn't want me there, they wouldn't get what I paid for either. Before I share how I went from mother of the groom to wedding crasher in my own right, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that subscribe button if you've ever had to stand up for yourself when family let you down. Being a single mom wasn't my life plan, but when my husband walked out when Jacob was just 3 years old, I had no choice but to make it work. I remember sitting on our apartment floor that first night alone, Jacob sleeping peacefully while I sobbed silently, wondering how I'd manage. But manage, I did. I worked as a nurse during the day and took on administrative work in the evenings while Jacob stayed with my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson. Every morning, I'd wake up at 5 a.m. to prepare Jacob's lunch before my shift started. Those early morning moments in our tiny kitchen, watching him eat breakfast while I packed his dinosaur-themed lunchbox, became precious memories. We didn't have much, but we had each other. Weekends were sacred. No matter how exhausted I was from my double shifts, Sundays were our special day. We called it Super Sunday. Pancakes for breakfast, a trip to the local park, and an afternoon movie or board game. As Jacob grew older, these traditions evolved, but never disappeared. When he became a teenager obsessed with computer programming, our Super Sundays shifted to him teaching me basic coding while I made his favorite lasagna. I sacrificed everything for Jacob's future. When his high school computer science teacher mentioned he showed unusual promise, I took on extra shifts to pay for advanced coding classes. I still remember his face lighting up when I surprised him with his first real computer. Not top of the line, but good enough for him to develop his skills. I had saved for 6 months eating nothing but ramen noodles for dinner to make it happen. The college years were tough financially, but I was determined to help Jacob graduate debt-free. I refinanced our small house, worked overtime, and even sold my mother's antique jewelry collection. It was worth every penny when I watched him walk across the stage at graduation, becoming the first person in our family to earn a college degree. After college, Jacob landed a job at a prestigious tech company. I burst with pride watching him grow into a confident, successful young man. He would visit me every Sunday, continuing our tradition. He'd tell me about his projects, and though I barely understood the technical details, I loved seeing his passion. He always ended these visits with a hug and the same words, "I couldn't have done any of this without you, Mom." Then Ashley entered the picture. Jacob met her at work 2 years ago. She was beautiful, polished, and from a wealthy family. Everything I wasn't. At first, I was happy for him. During our phone calls, he sounded genuinely excited, his voice taking on a new animated quality when he mentioned her name. But slowly, things began to change. Our Sunday visits became less frequent. "Sorry, Mom, Ashley and I have brunch plans with her parents." Or, "We're checking out apartments across town." When he did visit our usual 3-hour hangouts, shortened to quick coffee stops, he seemed distracted, constantly checking his phone, smiling at Ashley's texts. I told myself this was normal. He was building his own life, falling in love. I shouldn't feel hurt or abandoned. What kind of mother would be jealous of her son's happiness? So, I smiled through the changes and convinced myself everything was fine. The first time I met Ashley was at a dinner Jacob arranged at an upscale restaurant I could barely afford. She arrived 20 minutes late, barely apologized, and spent the evening talking about her family's vacation home in Aspen and her father's connections in the tech industry. When I mentioned my nursing career, she responded with, "That must be so difficult dealing with all those bodily fluids," before turning the conversation back to herself. Jacob didn't seem to notice her dismissiveness. He gazed at her adoringly, laughing at her jokes, agreeing with everything she said. When I tried to share a funny story about Jacob's childhood, she checked her watch and whispered something in his ear. Minutes later, he was asking for the check, cutting our dinner short. Despite these warning signs, I was still shocked when Jacob announced their engagement after only 10 months of dating. "She's the one, Mom," he insisted over the phone. "When you know, you know." I swallowed my concerns and congratulated him, promising to help however I could. Little did I know that helping would mean financing a wedding that would ultimately break my heart. When wedding planning began, I was genuinely excited to be involved. I'd dreamed of Jacob's wedding day since he was small, imagining how proud I'd feel watching my son begin this new chapter. I had saved $50,000 over the years in what I called my Jacob Fund, originally intended to help with a house down payment, but now perfect for contributing to his wedding. The first planning meeting at Ashley's parents' sprawling suburban home set the tone. Their house was at least 3 times the size of my modest ranch-style home, with expensive artwork and a perfectly manicured lawn. Ashley's mother, Margaret, greeted me with air kisses and a once-over glance that made me feel like I'd already failed some unspoken test. "We're thinking a spring wedding at the Westbrook Country Club," Ashley announced as we sat in their sunroom. "Nothing too large, just 200 of our closest friends and family." 200 people seemed enormous to me, but I nodded supportively. "That sounds lovely. I have some ideas too. Jacob always loved the botanical gardens where we used to visit on weekends." Ashley and Margaret exchanged glances. "The Westbrook is really the premier venue," Margaret said dismissively. "Ashley's cousin had her wedding there last year, and it was featured in Regional Weddings magazine." Jacob sat silently beside Ashley, holding her hand. When I caught his eye, hoping for support, he quickly looked away. "I'd like to contribute financially," I offered. "I've been saving for Jacob's future for many years." This perked up Ashley's interest. "That's so sweet, Leontine. We were hoping you'd want to help make our day special." What followed was a discussion about costs that left me lightheaded. Premium open bar, hand-calligraphed invitations, imported flowers, gourmet 5-course dinner. The list went on. When numbers were mentioned, I realized my entire savings would barely cover half the total. "I can commit $45,000, I said carefully. "That should cover the venue deposit, catering, flowers, and perhaps the photographer." "Perfect!" Ashley clapped her hands together. "Daddy will handle the rest." I expected her father, Richard, to perhaps object or negotiate, but he merely nodded from behind his newspaper. I later learned he was the CEO of a successful investment firm. My yearly salary was probably his monthly bonus. As planning progressed, I noticed a pattern. My suggestions were politely acknowledged, then promptly ignored. I mentioned including my grandmother's lace handkerchief as Jacob's something old, a family tradition. Ashley wrinkled her nose. "We're going for a clean, modern aesthetic. Vintage items might clash." I suggested incorporating Jacob's favorite music into the reception playlist. "We've hired a classical quartet followed by a premium DJ with experience at celebrity weddings," Margaret countered. "The music selections have already been curated." When vendors needed deposits, my checkbook was welcome. When design decisions were made, my input wasn't. I found myself writing checks for items I'd never seen approved or discussed. One afternoon, I discovered they'd changed the menu entirely after I'd already paid the catering deposit for the selections we'd originally agreed upon. When I mentioned this to Jacob on the phone, his response stunned me. "Mom, Ashley has a vision for her perfect day. Can't you just support us without trying to control everything?" "I'm not trying to control anything," I replied, hurt. "I just thought, since I'm paying for the catering, I'd be consulted about changes." "See, this is what Ashley meant," he sighed. "You're making this about money and keeping score." After that conversation, I retreated further into the role they seemed to want from me, silent financier. I wrote checks, nodded at their decisions, and swallowed my hurt. Each time I visited the wedding planner's office to make a payment, she gave me sympathetic looks, but said nothing. The final straw came during what should have been a special moment, Ashley's final dress fitting. I'd been invited along with her mother and bridesmaids. I took time off work and drove an hour to the boutique only to find they'd started without me. As I entered, Ashley was already on the pedestal, Margaret adjusting her veil. "Oh, Leontine, you made it," Margaret said without looking up. "We thought you might be held up at work, so we went ahead." I stood awkwardly at the edge of the group watching Ashley twirl in her gown, a gown I had contributed $5,000 toward. No one made space for me in the semicircle of admirers. No one asked my opinion. When photos were taken, I wasn't invited to join. As I drove home alone that evening, tears blurred my vision. The truth finally settled in my heart. I wasn't a participant in my son's wedding. I was an ATM with maternal feelings useful for financial contributions, but not worthy of inclusion in the celebration I was helping fund. Still, I told myself to endure it for Jacob's sake. The wedding was less than 2 weeks away. I could get through it with my dignity intact, then work on rebuilding my relationship with my son afterward. I had no idea how much worse things would get. The night of the rehearsal dinner arrived, and despite everything, I felt a flutter of excitement. Surely now, with the wedding so close, the tension would ease. This was, after all, a celebration of family coming together. I wore a new dress I'd splurged on, navy blue with delicate beading that had cost more than I'd spent on myself in years. My hairdresser had styled my silver-streaked hair in an elegant updo, and for the first time in months, I felt beautiful and hopeful. The restaurant Ashley's parents had chosen was the kind with no prices on the menu and sommeliers hovering near every table. Crystal chandeliers hung from coffered ceilings, and the table settings included more flatware than I knew what to do with. As I handed my car keys to the valet, I gave myself a pep talk. Be gracious, be positive. This is Jacob's night. Walking into the private dining room, I searched for Jacob among the crowd of well-dressed guests. When I finally spotted him, he was deep in conversation with Richard Ashley's father. I approached with a smile, touching his elbow gently. "There's my handsome son," I said warmly. Jacob turned, his expression shifting from animated to something more contained. "Mom, you made it." He gave me a quick, one-armed hug. "You remember Ashley's dad?" Richard nodded curtly without offering his hand. "If you'll excuse me, I need to check on the wine selection." He walked away without another word to me. "Where should I sit?" I asked Jacob, noticing people beginning to find their places. "Oh, I think you're at table 4, he said, glancing around distractedly. "Ashley's dealing with a last-minute flower crisis. I should go check on her." Table 4, I soon discovered, was positioned far from the main table where Jacob, Ashley, and her parents would sit. I found myself seated with Ashley's great-aunt, 2 distant cousins, and a college friend who hadn't made the cut for bridesmaid. The message couldn't have been clearer. I was an afterthought, not an honored mother of the groom. Throughout the appetizer course, I maintained a pleasant conversation with my table mates, ignoring the lump in my throat. When Ashley's father stood to give the first toast, I sat up straighter, smiling in anticipation. "Today we celebrate the union of 2 extraordinary young people," Richard began, champagne flute raised high. "Ashley, our perfect daughter, has always brought joy to our lives. And Jacob, well, Margaret and I couldn't have picked a better man for our little girl if we'd selected him ourselves." He continued for several minutes speaking about their children, as if Jacob had always been part of their family, never once acknowledging my presence or my role in raising the man their daughter was marrying. Margaret followed with her own speech, equally exclusionary. When Jacob stood to thank everyone, he mentioned Ashley's parents' generosity repeatedly, but referred to me only as my mom, who's also here tonight. And after the main course, I approached the wedding planner who was coordinating the evening. "I'd like to offer a toast as well," I said quietly. She looked uncomfortable. "The schedule is quite tight, but let me check." She disappeared to consult with Margaret, returning with a tight smile. You can have 2 minutes after the dessert is served. 2 minutes. After raising Jacob for 25 years alone, I was allotted 2 minutes to express my feelings. When my turn finally came, I approached the small podium with my heart racing. Looking out at the sea of faces, I found Jacob and began speaking from the heart. From the moment I first held Jacob in my arms, I knew my life had found its purpose. I started. Through all the scraped knees and science projects, the late-night talks and early morning carpools, my greatest joy has been watching him grow into the man he is today. As I continued, I noticed Ashley whispering to her bridesmaid, rolling her eyes slightly. Jacob was checking his watch. Before I could reach the part about welcoming Ashley to our family, the wedding planner was at my elbow, subtly indicating my time was up. Congratulations to you both, I finished abruptly. I love you, Jacob. The applause was polite but brief. As I returned to my seat, I heard Ashley's mother loudly announce it was time for the specialty dessert course, and dancing would follow immediately. Near the restrooms later that evening, I accidentally overheard a conversation that shattered what remained of my heart. Ashley was standing with 3 of her bridesmaids just around the corner. Did you see her dress? Ashley was saying. It's so department store clearance rack. I told Jacob she needs to understand the aesthetic we're going for tomorrow. What about the photos? One bridesmaid asked. Is she going to be in all of them? God, no, Ashley laughed. We've arranged it so she's only in a few family combinations. My mom had a long talk with the photographer. Otherwise, it would throw off the entire visual story we're creating. Good call, another bridesmaid agreed. No offense, but her hair color doesn't even match the palette and that it. They dissolved into giggles as I stood frozen, my hand pressed against the wall for support. This wasn't just exclusion. It was active disdain, and they weren't even trying to hide it. When Jacob stepped out of the men's room moments later, I pulled him aside, tears threatening to fall. I overheard Ashley and her friends talking about me, I whispered. They're planning to keep me out of most photos tomorrow. They were laughing about my appearance. Jacob's expression hardened. You were eavesdropping, Mom. You're overreacting. Ashley's stressed about tomorrow. Everyone says things they don't mean when they're planning a wedding. This isn't wedding stress, I insisted. Jacob, can't you see how I'm being treated? How you're allowing me to be treated? He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. Look, can we not do this right now? It's our rehearsal dinner. Just try to be positive for once. Positive? I repeated incredulously. I've written checks totaling over $40,000 for this wedding. I've swallowed every slight, accepted every dismissal, and smiled through it all. What more do you want from me? I want you to stop making this about you, he hissed, lowering his voice as guests walked by. This is Ashley's and my day. Not everything revolves around you and your feelings. With that, he walked away, returning to Ashley's side without a backward glance. I spent the remainder of the evening in a fog, mechanically smiling when appropriate, counting the minutes, until I could leave without causing a scene. Back in my hotel room, I sobbed into my pillow like I hadn't done since Jacob's father left us. The son I had raised, the boy who once made me Mother's Day cards with handprints and told me I was his hero, now couldn't even see how deeply I was hurting. Worse, he didn't seem to care. Despite everything, I still intended to attend the wedding the next day. I would plaster on a smile stand where I was told and be the bigger person. Just before falling into an exhausted sleep, my phone pinged with a text from Jacob. Sorry about tonight. Tomorrow will be better. Love you. Those simple words gave me hope. Perhaps in the light of his wedding day, surrounded by love and celebration, Jacob would remember who had always been there for him. Perhaps tomorrow would indeed be better. I had no idea that better wasn't in the cards for me. Instead, the worst humiliation was yet to come. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear. I woke early, my brief hope from Jacob's text message carrying me through my morning routine. I carefully applied my makeup, styled my hair, and put on the mother of the groom dress I'd had specially made, a champagne-colored gown with delicate lace overlay that had cost me nearly a month's salary. Today is about Jacob, I reminded my reflection in the mirror. Just get through today with grace. I arrived at the Westbrook Country Club 2 hours before the ceremony, as requested in the detailed schedule the wedding planner had distributed. The venue was stunning. Sweeping lawns, flowering gardens, and an elegant ballroom with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a lake. Fresh flowers adorned every surface, their sweet scent filling the air. Knowing I had paid for those arrangements gave me a small sense of belonging. A staff member directed me to the family preparation area, which turned out to be a large suite where the bridal party was getting ready. When I entered the room, fell silent. Ashley sat in the center, a hairstylist working on her elaborate updo, surrounded by bridesmaids in matching silk robes. "Leontine," Ashley said, her tone suggesting I was an unexpected delivery person rather than the mother of the groom. "We're in the middle of hair and makeup. Did you need something?" "I thought I might help," I offered, holding up a small bag. "I brought some emergency supplies: fashion tape, extra hairpins, aspirin." "We have a professional emergency kit," one bridesmaid said, pointing to an elaborate case on a nearby table. "The wedding planner handles all that." "Where is Jacob getting ready?" I asked, trying another approach. "I'd love to see him before the ceremony." "The men are in the West Wing," Ashley replied. "But they're doing photos now, and the photographer has a strict schedule." Her implication was clear. I wasn't part of that schedule. Before I could respond, the wedding coordinator, Veronica, appeared at my elbow. "Mrs. Turner, perhaps you'd be more comfortable in the main hall. We're serving champagne for early arrivals." Being shuffled off to sit with guests when I should have been with family stung, but I nodded and followed Veronica. As we walked, I asked about the timeline of events. "I'm not seeing my name in the processional," I mentioned, looking at the program she carried. Veronica looked uncomfortable. "Ah, yes, there was a change to the traditional processional. Ashley and her parents decided on a different approach." Translation: I wouldn't be escorted down the aisle as the mother of the groom. Another tradition, another recognition of my role erased. As I sipped champagne alone in a corner of the rapidly filling hall, I noticed something else. My name was completely absent from the printed programs being distributed. Under "With Gratitude," where parents were typically acknowledged only Richard and Margaret Davidson, were listed as parents of the bride. No mention of me at all, despite funding half the celebration. My hand trembled as I set down my glass. This deliberate erasure went beyond oversight or wedding stress. This was systematic exclusion. 40 minutes before the ceremony was set to begin, I spotted Jacob in the hallway outside the groom's suite, looking handsome in his tuxedo. My heart swelled with maternal pride despite everything. This was still my son, my Jacob, on his wedding day. "Jacob," I called, hurrying over. "You look so handsome." He turned, his expression immediately tense. "Mom, you're early." "I came when the schedule said to arrive," I explained. "Jacob, I noticed I'm not mentioned in the program, and the coordinator said I'm not in the processional." He glanced around nervously, then pulled me into an empty side room. "Look, there's been some adjustments to make things flow better." "Flow better, Jacob? I'm your mother. How does erasing me make anything better?" He ran a hand through his carefully styled hair. "Ashley's parents are very traditional. They're paying for most of this, and they have certain expectations about how things should look. I've contributed over $45,000, I reminded him, my voice rising slightly. Doesn't that earn me the basic respect of acknowledgement? It's not about the money, he said dismissively. It's about creating a cohesive family presentation. Cohesive family. I am your family, Jacob. Your only family for most of your life.
He checked his watch, clearly anxious to end the conversation. "Mom, there's something else." He paused, not meeting my eyes. "Ashley's parents think it would be better if you watched from the back row instead of the front." The words hit me like a physical blow. The back row, why? They've arranged specific family groupings for the ceremony and photos. Ashley's stepmother will be wearing the traditional mother-of-groom corsage, since she matches the color scheme better and balances the photos with Ashley's father. I stared at him, disbelief rendering me momentarily speechless. "Let me understand this. You're asking me, your mother, who raised you alone, to sit in the back row of your wedding while your fiancé's stepmother takes my place. The place I paid for with my own money." Jacob's face hardened. "This is exactly why they're concerned. You keep bringing up money and making demands." "Basic respect isn't a demand, Jacob. It's the minimum I deserve." Guests were beginning to enter the ceremony space now, some glancing curiously at our tense conversation. "Mom, please," Jacob said, lowering his voice. "Just do this one thing without making a scene. It's important to Ashley." "What about what's important to me?" I asked, tears threatening. "What about what's important to you? I'm your mother, Jacob." His expression shifted from frustration to cold distance. "Maybe it would be better if you just left. You're making this difficult for everyone." The words hung in the air between us, impossible to take back or unhear. My own son telling me to leave his wedding, the wedding I had sacrificed to help provide. Several guests had paused nearby, witnessing my humiliation. I saw pity in their eyes, perhaps a few flashes of indignation on my behalf, but mostly awkward discomfort. In that moment, something inside me broke. But something else, something stronger, took its place. A clarity I hadn't felt in months washed over me. I straightened my shoulders and looked directly into the eyes of the son I no longer recognized. "You're right, Jacob. I should leave." My voice was surprisingly steady. "This isn't where I belong." I turned and walked away, head held high, despite the tears streaming down my face. Behind me, I heard Jacob release a sigh that sounded almost like relief. That small sound was the final cut on my already bleeding heart. In my car, I allowed myself exactly 2 minutes of breakdown, sobbing, pounding the steering wheel, releasing the raw pain of betrayal. Then, wiping my tears, I opened my purse and removed a folder containing all my wedding contribution receipts, contracts, and payment confirmations. If I wasn't welcome at this wedding as a mother, then my money wasn't welcome either. For the first time in this entire process, I knew exactly what I needed to do. As I sat in my car, collecting myself, years of memories flashed through my mind. Jacob's 5th birthday, when I'd worked double shifts to afford the bike he wanted. His high school graduation, where I'd stood cheering louder than anyone. The nights I'd gone hungry so he could have proper meals. All the sacrifices, large and small, that parents make out of love. And this was how it ended, being told to leave his wedding like an unwelcome stranger. The folder of receipts in my lap represented more than money. It represented my participation in what should have been one of the happiest days of our lives together. If Jacob and Ashley didn't want that participation, then they wouldn't have its benefits either. I started my car and drove around to the service entrance of the Westbrook Country Club. Having made multiple visits during the planning process, I knew this was where vendors arrived and where the catering manager's office was located. Thomas, the catering manager, had always been kind to me, taking time to explain options when Ashley and her mother were dismissive. I found him in his office, reviewing last-minute details with his staff. When he saw my tear-stained face, he immediately excused his team and offered me a seat. "Mrs. Turner, what's happened? Are you all right?" "No, Thomas, I'm not," I admitted. "I've just been asked to leave my son's wedding." His expression registered shock, then sympathy. "I don't understand. You're the mother of the groom. Apparently that doesn't matter. I placed my folder on his desk. What does matter is that I'm the person who paid for the catering. All of it. The premium open bar, the 5-course dinner, the midnight snack station, everything. I opened the folder and showed him the contracts with my signature and payment receipts totaling over $18,000. According to our contract, any changes require the approval of the person who signed and paid, I said, pointing to the relevant clause. I'm making a change. I want to cancel the premium bar and revert to cash bar only. And I want to cancel the lobster and steak options, keeping only the chicken alternative. Thomas looked uncomfortable. Mrs. Turner, the wedding begins in less than an hour. I understand the timing is difficult. That's why I'm not canceling everything. Just downgrading to what would be appropriate for people who don't value the person paying. He studied the contract, then my face. This is within your rights, according to our agreement, he acknowledged slowly. But are you certain this is a decision that can't be reversed once we implement it? I've never been more certain of anything, I replied, my resolve strengthening. If they don't want me, they don't get the benefits of my contribution. After a moment's hesitation, Thomas nodded. I'll need you to sign an amendment form, and I should warn you, this won't go over well. I'm past the point of caring about that, I said, taking the pen he offered. From there, I visited the florist who had set up a small workspace for last-minute arrangements. Sophia had been my ally throughout the planning, often slipping me sketches when Ashley's mother changed orders without telling me. Leontine, shouldn't you be getting ready for the ceremony? She asked, then noticed my expression. What's wrong? I explained the situation briefly, then showed her my receipts for the $12,000 floral package I'd funded. Like Thomas, she confirmed that as the contracting client I had the right to modify the order. With evident reluctance but professional understanding, she agreed to remove 60% of the arrangements, leaving only the bare minimum for the ceremony and essential tables. I'm sorry it's come to this, she said, squeezing my hand. For what it's worth, I've worked hundreds of weddings, and I've never seen a mother of the groom treated the way you've been. My next stop was the photography team, where I encountered more resistance. The lead photographer, Kevin, was clearly torn between contractual obligations and reluctance to get involved in family drama. The photo package is already in progress, he explained, pointing to his second shooter who was currently with the groomsmen. We can't simply stop working. I'm not asking you to stop completely, I clarified. But as the person who paid your $5,500 fee in full, I'm exercising my right to modify the package. Basic ceremony coverage only, no special effects, no drone shots, no photo booth, and no extended reception coverage. After reviewing the contract and making several uncomfortable phone calls to his business partner, Kevin, reluctantly agreed, instructing his team to pack up most of their specialty equipment and prepare for minimal coverage only. I continued my rounds, speaking to the DJ about canceling the special lighting package and custom playlist, instructing the rental company to remove the premium chair covers and upgraded linens, and finally meeting with the venue coordinator to cancel the champagne toast and chocolate fountain. With each conversation, my confidence grew. This wasn't about revenge, though I couldn't deny a certain vindication. This was about standing up for myself after months of being dismissed, disrespected, and taken for granted. If I had learned anything from raising Jacob alone, it was that sometimes the hardest lessons were the most necessary ones. By the time I finished, nearly 45 minutes had passed. Guests would be seated for the ceremony, now unaware of the scaled-back reception awaiting them. I drove my car to a discreet location with a view of the venue entrance, feeling oddly calm as I watched staff hurriedly removing floral arrangements and equipment. My phone began ringing. First the wedding planner, then Ashley's mother, and finally Jacob himself. I let them all go to voicemail until Jacob called a second time. Something told me I should hear what he had to say. Mom! His voice was panicked. What's happening? The wedding coordinator says vendors are packing up and saying you canceled services. What are you doing? Not canceling, Jacob. Just modifying to reflect my actual role in this wedding, I replied calmly. If I'm not important enough to be treated with respect, then neither is my money. You can't do this, he nearly shouted. Guests are arriving. Ashley is hysterical. I absolutely can do this. Every contract is in my name with my signature paid with my money. Money I earned working overtime and sacrificing for years so you could have nice things. This is insane, he sputtered. This is my wedding day. Yes, it is, I agreed. And you made it abundantly clear I'm not welcome at it, so I've removed myself and everything I paid for. We need to fix this now, he demanded. Tell the vendors to put everything back. It was never our wedding, Jacob, as you and Ashley have reminded me repeatedly. It's your wedding, and now it's the wedding you can afford without my contribution. In the background, I could hear Ashley wailing and her father shouting at someone. A small, petty part of me enjoyed the chaos, but mostly I felt a deep sadness for what our relationship had become. Mom, please. Jacob's voice broke slightly. Don't ruin this day. I didn't ruin anything, Jacob. You and Ashley did that when you decided I wasn't good enough to stand beside you. I hope your marriage is more respectful than this wedding has been. I ended the call and turned off my phone. Through my windshield, I could see Ashley's father striding toward the parking area, presumably looking for me. I started my car and drove away before he could spot me. Strangely, I didn't feel the satisfaction I had expected. There was no triumphant glee, no sense of having won anything. Instead, I felt an odd, peaceful emptiness, the kind that comes when you finally stop trying to hold on to something that's already gone. I drove to my best friend Diane's house instead of returning to my empty home. She had been hearing about the wedding drama for months and had offered to be my sanctuary if things went badly. I hadn't expected to need it quite this dramatically. When I arrived and told her what had happened, she didn't judge or question my actions. She simply poured me a glass of wine, ordered takeout, and sat with me as the full emotional weight of the day crashed over me in waves. You stood up for yourself, she said as I cried. After a lifetime of putting Jacob first, you finally put yourself first. That's not wrong, Leontine. My phone, when I finally turned it back on around midnight, was flooded with messages, some outraged, some concerned, some surprisingly supportive from relatives who had witnessed my treatment. Jacob had left several voicemails evolving from anger to a grudging acknowledgement that perhaps he had been a bit insensitive about my feelings. The last message, sent as a text just before midnight, read, "The wedding happened. Not like we planned, but it happened." Ashley's parents covered some of the differences. We're leaving for our honeymoon tomorrow. We need to talk when I get back. I'm still angry, but I understand a little why you did it. I'm sorry things got to this point. It wasn't a full apology or recognition of how deeply I had been hurt, but it was something, a tiny crack in the wall that had formed between us. Whether that crack would widen into a path back to each other, or simply collapse the entire structure of our relationship, remained to be seen. As I fell asleep on Diane's guest bed, I felt no triumph or revenge-fueled satisfaction. But for the first time in months, I also felt no need to make myself smaller to accommodate others' expectations. I had finally stood up for my own worth, even at great cost. That, at least, was something I wouldn't regret. The 3 months following Jacob's wedding were the loneliest of my life since those first days as a single mother. The complete silence from my son opened a void that nothing else could fill. No Sunday visits, no text messages asking how my week had been, no familiar voice calling me mom. The absence was physical, like phantom limb pain where our relationship had been amputated. The first few weeks I swung between righteous anger and crushing guilt. Had I overreacted? Was a mother supposed to endure any treatment just to maintain peace? I replayed every interaction, every slight, every moment leading up to my breaking point. Each time I reached the same conclusion: I deserved better than what they had offered me. My colleagues at the hospital noticed the change in me. "You're quieter these days," my friend Linda observed during our lunch break. When I explained what had happened expecting judgment, I was surprised by the support I received instead. "My sister's mother-in-law was treated the same way," the hospital receptionist told me. "She just took it because she was afraid of losing access to her grandchildren. 10 years later, she's still the family doormat." "You taught your son a necessary lesson," an elderly doctor advised me. "Whether he learns from it is up to him, but you can sleep knowing you didn't surrender your dignity." These conversations helped, but they couldn't fill the Jacob-shaped hole in my life. I found myself preparing meals for 2 out of habit, then staring at the empty chair across from me. I'd hear a joke or see something interesting and reach for my phone to tell him, only to remember we weren't speaking. To survive the silence, I had to rebuild my life around the absence. I joined a book club that met on Sunday afternoons, deliberately scheduling over what had been our traditional time together. I volunteered at an animal shelter on Saturday mornings. I reconnected with friends I'd neglected while focusing so much energy on Jacob and the wedding. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, the raw wound began to scab over. Not heal. I wasn't sure it ever would completely, but the bleeding stopped. I could go hours, sometimes a full day, without the ache of loss overwhelming me. Then, exactly 12 weeks after the wedding, an email arrived from Jacob. "Mom," it began simply, "I'm back from the honeymoon and settled into our new place. I've had a lot of time to think about what happened. While I still believe your actions at the wedding were extreme, I understand now that you were pushed to that point by how you were treated, by Ashley, her family, and by me. I was so focused on making Ashley happy that I forgot my first responsibility was to the person who had always put my happiness first. I'm sorry for how things unfolded. If you're willing, I'd like to talk." I read the message a dozen times, analyzing every word. It wasn't a complete acknowledgement of how deeply I had been wounded, but it was a start, a hand reaching across the chasm between us. After 2 days of consideration, I responded with a suggestion to meet at a neutral coffee shop halfway between our homes. When I saw Jacob walk through the door, my heart constricted painfully. He looked older, somehow more serious, the carefree boy I'd raised nowhere visible in his expression. We exchanged awkward greetings, ordered our drinks, and found a quiet table in the corner. "You look well," he offered, though his eyes noted the weight I'd lost, the new streaks of gray in my hair. "Thank you. How was the honeymoon?" I asked politely, as if we were distant acquaintances. "Shorter than planned," he admitted. "We had to adjust some things after the wedding changes." We sipped our coffees in silence for a moment before he spoke again. "I've been trying to understand how things went so wrong," he said finally. "When I proposed to Ashley, I never imagined it would damage my relationship with you." "I never imagined that either," I replied softly. "But Jacob, I spent months being systematically excluded, dismissed, and disrespected, while simultaneously being expected to contribute financially. By the time you told me to leave the wedding, it wasn't one isolated incident. It was the culmination of countless wounds." He winced at the reminder. "I shouldn't have said that. I was stressed and caught between Ashley's expectations and your feelings." "That's just it, Jacob. You were caught between your fiancée and your mother, and you consistently chose her even when the choice involved humiliating me." He stared into his coffee. "Ashley's family has very specific ideas about appearances. They put a lot of pressure on her, which she passed on to me." "And you passed it on to me," I pointed out. "But I'm not interested in blaming Ashley entirely. You're an adult, Jacob. You made your own choices." He nodded slowly. "I did, and they weren't good ones." He looked up at me directly. I'm sorry, Mom. Truly sorry. You deserved better from me. The apology, simple but sincere, loosened something that had been tightly coiled inside me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the possibility of it. Where is Ashley today? I asked, noticing her absence for the first time. Jacob shifted uncomfortably. She isn't ready to see you yet. She took the wedding changes very personally. They were personal, I acknowledged, but they weren't about hurting her. They were about refusing to continue being hurt myself. I understand that now, he said. It might take Ashley longer. We talked for nearly 2 hours, carefully navigating the minefield of hurt feelings and broken trust. Jacob explained more about the pressure from Ashley's family, their obsession with appearances and social standing, how he'd been caught in an impossible situation trying to please everyone. But that doesn't excuse how I treated you, he concluded. You were right when you said I forgot who was always there for me. As we prepared to leave, Jacob asked hesitantly, Can we try again? Build something new between us? We can try, I agreed. But Jacob, I need you to understand something important. I will always love you as my son, but I will never again allow myself to be treated as less than by you or anyone else in your life. That's my non-negotiable boundary. He nodded solemnly. I understand. Our reconciliation was slow and measured. We began with weekly phone calls, then occasional lunches. Jacob came alone without Ashley, whose name was rarely mentioned. When he finally asked if he could visit my home again 2 months after our coffee shop meeting, it felt like a significant milestone. Seeing him at my kitchen table again brought a flood of memories. Jacob doing homework there as a boy, sharing dreams as a teenager, planning his future as a young man. But this was a different Jacob than the son I had known, and I was a different mother. We were finding our way toward a new relationship, one built on more equal footing. Ashley's birthday is next month, Jacob mentioned during his 3rd visit. Her parents are hosting a dinner. She asked if you might come. I considered the invitation carefully. Is this her idea or yours? Hers, he admitted. Things have been strained with her family since the wedding. I think she's realized some things about how they operate. I appreciate the invitation, but I think it's too soon, I replied honestly. When Ashley and I eventually meet again, it should be in a more private setting, where we can speak openly. Jacob accepted my decision without argument, another sign of our evolving relationship. When Thanksgiving approached and he extended an invitation to join them, I declined that too, suggesting we plan our own celebration for another day. I'm not punishing you or her, I explained when I saw his disappointment. I'm protecting my heart while it's still healing. 6 months after the wedding debacle, Jacob visited alone for dinner at my home, the first time he'd done so since before meeting Ashley. As we ate the lasagna that had once been the centerpiece of our Sunday traditions, he shared something unexpected. Ashley and I have started couples counseling, he said. Her parents are horrified, of course. They think therapy is for other people, but we need it. Why? I asked, genuinely curious. Because what happened with you showed us both some ugly truths, he explained. For me, it was how easily I betrayed my values under pressure. For Ashley, it was seeing her parents' controlling behavior from an outside perspective for the first time. This revelation surprised me. Perhaps some good had come from the painful wedding experience after all. Not just for me in reclaiming my self-respect, but for Jacob in recognizing patterns he didn't want to repeat. As the 1-year anniversary of the wedding approached, our relationship had reached a new equilibrium. Not the unquestioning closeness we once shared, but something more mature and in some ways more honest. Jacob had learned to see me as a person with feelings and boundaries, not just as mom, who would endure anything for his happiness. I had learned that loving him didn't mean sacrificing my dignity. Ashley and I eventually met for a cautious lunch, where she offered an apology that seemed at least partially sincere. I accepted it with the same measure of sincerity, neither of us pretending we would ever be close, but acknowledging we needed to find a workable peace for Jacob's sake. Throughout this journey of reconciliation, I discovered strengths in myself I hadn't known existed. The woman who had stood in that wedding venue parking lot reclaiming her worth after being discarded was someone I could respect, someone who finally valued herself as much as she valued others. If someone had told me on that devastating wedding day that the pain would eventually lead to growth, I wouldn't have believed them. But standing up for myself, as difficult and heartbreaking as it was, forced both Jacob and me to confront truths we had been avoiding and rebuild on a healthier foundation. The wedding day that should have been a celebration became instead a crucible, burning away illusions and leaving behind something unexpected, a stronger, more authentic relationship built on mutual respect rather than obligation. Not what either of us had planned, but perhaps what we both needed. Looking back on that painful wedding day, now I can see it was a turning point in my life, not just in my relationship with Jacob, but in how I value myself. For most of my adult life, I had defined myself primarily as Jacob's mother, putting his needs and happiness above my own without question. When he rejected me so publicly, it shattered that identity and forced me to rebuild myself as simply Leontine, a woman with inherent worth beyond her role as someone's mother. The process hasn't been easy. There were nights I cried myself to sleep wondering if I had overreacted, if I had permanently damaged my relationship with my only child. There were mornings I woke up angry, rehearsing arguments and justifications in my mind. But gradually, those extreme emotions softened into something more nuanced, a quiet certainty that while the execution might have been dramatic, the principle was sound. I deserve respect, consideration, and appreciation. Jacob and I continue to rebuild our relationship one careful conversation at a time. We've established new traditions to replace our old Sunday routine: monthly dinners at a restaurant we both enjoy, occasional museum visits, phone calls that focus on really listening to each other rather than just exchanging information. These interactions feel more intentional now, less taken for granted. I've noticed changes in Jacob too. He's more thoughtful about how his words and actions affect others. He's developed the courage to disagree with Ashley when necessary, rather than automatically deferring to her preferences. Their marriage seems to be finding a healthier balance than it started with, though I'm careful not to intrude too much into that aspect of his life. Ashley and I maintain a cordial relationship, neither close nor hostile. She sent me a handwritten note on my birthday last month, a small gesture that would have been unimaginable before the wedding incident. I don't expect us to ever share the mother-daughter bond I once hoped for, but we're finding a way to coexist respectfully in Jacob's life. As for me, I've discovered there's a full, rich life waiting when you stop defining yourself solely through your relationship to others. I've taken up painting, something I'd always wanted to try but never made time for when Jacob was growing up. I've deepened friendships that had taken a back seat during the wedding planning chaos. I even started dating recently, having coffee with a kind widower who works at the hospital, something the old Leontine would have considered unthinkable. The greatest lesson from this painful chapter has been learning the difference between love and submission. Real love, whether for a child, a partner, or a friend, doesn't require erasing yourself or accepting disrespect. Standing up for yourself isn't selfish. Sometimes it's the most necessary form of self-preservation. I still think about that moment in the venue parking lot when I decided to take back what I had paid for. It wasn't my proudest moment in terms of timing or method. A wiser, more evolved person might have addressed the issues long before they reached that breaking point. But in that moment, after months of diminishment and that final devastating rejection, it was an act of self-reclamation. Jacob asked me recently if I regret what I did. After careful consideration, I told him the truth. I regret that things reached a point where such a dramatic statement was necessary. I regret the pain it caused him on what should have been a joyful day. But I don't regret finally standing up for myself after months of allowing myself to be devalued and dismissed. I taught you many things as you grew up, I told him. How to tie your shoes, how to solve math problems, how to be kind to others. But that day at the wedding, I taught you something else, that even the people who love you most have limits to what they'll accept. That lesson wasn't in my parenting plan, but maybe it was one you needed. He nodded thoughtfully. It changed how I see relationships, he admitted. I always saw you as mom, just there unconditional without needs of your own. I never thought about what it cost you to be that for me. That acknowledgement was worth more than any apology. If there's wisdom I've gained from this experience that might help others, it's this. Love doesn't mean accepting mistreatment. Giving doesn't mean allowing yourself to be exploited. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and others, is to draw a line that says no further. The relationship Jacob and I have now isn't what I imagined when I dreamed about his wedding day during those long years of single motherhood. It's more complicated, less idealized, but it's also more authentic, built on mutual respect rather than just biological obligation. We see each other more clearly now, not just the roles we play in each other's lives, but the full-flawed humans behind those roles. That clarity, painful as it was to achieve, has been worth the journey. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself with family, even when it hurt? Would you have done what I did, or found another way? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more real-life experiences. Remember that setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's sometimes the most loving thing you can do, both for yourself and for those who need to learn how to truly value you. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find the courage to honor your own worth in all your relationships.